Well, the Democrats don't want to do debates. I know Marianne Williamson and RFK Jr. want to debate. What do you think about that?
Well, I understand why he doesn't want to do it. I mean, I truly understand why he doesn't want to do it. But they are, there's a big difference. Although, in the case of RFK, I've seen polls where he's at 20%. That's not bad. But I understand why he doesn't want to do that. Look, when you're running for office and you have, in his case, let's say he has a 30 or 40-point lead, why would he do it? Now, people are going to say, well, he can't do it. I actually think he can't do it, if you want to know the truth. I don't think he's capable of doing it. But why would he do it? Especially because of that. Why would he do it? If he's got a 30 or 40-point lead, which is what he's got, I mean, I don't think RFK expects that he's going to be debating. He's a very smart guy, by the way. I don't think he expects to be debating Biden.
You've spent time with him, RFK. Tell me about him.
I have.
Is he a formidable competitor?
He's a very smart person, yeah. I know a lot of the members of that family, and, he's a very smart guy. And he's hit a little bit of a nerve. I think he really has. And a lot of Democrats I know want to vote for him. But again, if he's at 20% and if Biden has a big lead, number one, Biden can't debate him because he's not capable. And number two, why would he debate him? For that reason, but also, why would he debate him if he's probably got it locked up? I don't see RFK Jr., I don't see him getting the nomination under any circumstances.
How do you feel about potentially running alongside Donald Trump?
I want to run against Trump, and I can run against Trump better than anybody else can.
Do you think you could win?
I know I can win because I can hold it, because I get, I get many of the same supporters. I will take support from President Trump. No other Democrat can do that. My supporters are probably equally Republican and Democrat at this point. And I get more independent voters than anybody. And I can confront President Trump with the lockdowns, which no Democrat can. Lockdowns, he closed 3.3 million businesses. He closed 41% of the black-owned businesses in our country would never reopen again. This is a war on the poor. It was a war on minorities. It was the destruction of the middle class.
Bobby Kennedy, he's a Democrat from the first family, they used to call it, and he's taking almost as much heat as you are from fake news. What would you tell Bobby Kennedy?
Just hang in. I mean, they go after. He's been very nice to me. I've actually had a very nice relationship with him over the years. He's a very smart guy and a good guy. He said Trump's the greatest debater, and you can't just not debating going against Trump. I was very honored by the fact that he said that. I'm glad he feels that. But he's a very good man, and his heart is in the right place, and he's doing really well. I suppose he's at 22. That's pretty good. That's pretty good. Doing very well.
So have you talked to him lately?
No, I haven't. I would, but I haven't. Okay. There's a lot of things. He's a common sense guy, and so am I. So whether you're conservative or liberal, common sense is common sense. And a lot of what I run on is common sense. We need a wall, and we built most of it, but they didn't want to finish up the extra area. I wanted to do more. After we got it built, I wanted to do more. But without that, we had the best numbers in the border, as you know, because you've said it many times. We had the best numbers in history. Yeah. And now we have the worst numbers, I think, of any country ever in the world. Okay.
Well,
no country would allow this.
Mr. President, I know you got to run, so we welcome you back to New Hampshire and New England tomorrow, and look forward to seeing you again. And and you're welcome on the show anytime you want.
And people have said to me, "Why don't you run as an independent?" And I say, because I'm a Democrat. This is who I am. This is my identity. But I want my party back. I want my party to be the party that I grew up in, the party of John Kennedy, the party of Robert Kennedy, the party of FDR, and Harry Truman.
You say that you're a Democrat, but you're getting a lot of support from a lot of leading voices on the right, like Steve Bannon, Tucker Carlson, Alex Jones, former President Donald Trump. Many Democrats fear that you're a spoiler in the race, that you will damage President Biden in the primary and grease the skids for former President Trump to return to the Oval Office. This week, former President Trump said about you, Kennedy is smart and he's a common sense guy. What kind of man do you think Donald Trump is?
Well, here's what I'm not going to do in this race. I'm not going to attack other people personally. I don't think it's good for our country. And I think, what I'm trying to do in this race is bring people together, is to try to bridge the divide between Americans. My father was able to harness these populist energies. In the last day of his life, he won the most rural state in this country, South Dakota, and the most urban. He was able to bridge the divide among people who would otherwise be Republican, but wanted somebody who was common sense, who was able to appeal to their idealism, who was able to find the hero in each of them, who was able to get them to transcend narrow self-interest and see themselves as part of a community and part of this, incredible American adventure in modeling self-governance for the rest of the world. And so I'm proud that President Trump likes me, even though I don't agree with him on most of his issues. Because I don't want to alienate people. I want to bring people together. I'm proud that all these people like me and that I have independent supporters and Democratic supporters and that I'm able to bring a lot of people. Every Democrat says, I want to end the polarization. But how do you do that without talking to people who don't agree with you? How do you do that without appealing to people? My purpose is to find the issues, the values that we have in common, rather than, focus on the issues and the personalities that keep us all apart.
As a lifelong Democrat, as you just said very passionately, will you pledge to support whoever the Democratic nominee is, whoever it is, whether it's you, whether it's President Biden?
Oh, of course I'm not going to do that. I'm not
going to do that.
No, of course I'm not.
So
Listen,
if you don't get the nomination, you won't support President Biden?
I don't know what I'll do. Let's see let's see what happens in this campaign. Let's see, if people are living up to democratic values and having debates and having discussions and, talking to each other, but I'm not going to buy.
And if you feel that's not happening, would you then support a Republican or run as an independent?
You know what? My plan is to win this election, and I don't have a plan B.
Okay.
You're a lifelong Democrat, and yet so many Republicans are supporting you. And I'm sure when you gave that number about how much money you've gotten in campaign contributions, a lot of it is coming from Republicans. They're interested in you advancing to a debate with Joe Biden, which doesn't look like it's going to happen.
I mean, we're going to try to get the president to debate. We think it's really important. And it's important for I think the Democratic Party, because ultimately the president is going to have to debate a Republican, and the Republican likely, we don't know, but is going to be Trump. Trump is probably the most successful debater in this country since Lincoln Douglas. The way that he dispatched 16 Republican opponents, one after the other, during, in 2016 was really quite extraordinary. And he has his own technique that people like. And it's like going to a prize fight, and you need practice.
Sure.
And that usually happens during the primary. And asking, the president not to debate during the primary is like asking a prize fighter to practice for his big bout by sitting on a couch and eating Chick-fil-A.
It's interesting that you're saying that and praising him, because you normally don't hear that from a candidate who could potentially run against him. Are you learning? Did you learn through this campaign what your father taught you, what your uncle taught you, what Donald Trump has taught you?
Well, about what?
Just about how to run a campaign.
Well, I've got I have a very good staff at running this campaign. You met Dennis Kucinich, who's my campaign manager, and he's running 42 campaigns.
Former Fox News contributor.
He's nodding his head. Yes, he's doing a good job. Right off camera there.
I have never seen spirit like there is right now. Even coming down here, just the people on the road that are just absolutely going crazy. And the reason is, I think they like me, and I know they love my policies. I hope they like me too. A lot of people say they don't like me, but they like my policies. I think they like me. But I have never seen spirit like it is right now. And the reason is because crooked Joe Biden is so bad. He's the worst president in the history of our country. I don't think he's going to make it to the gate, but, you never know. But Joe is really...
But you don't think he's going to make it to November of 24?
Well, I think he's worse mentally than he is physically. And physically, he's not exactly a triathlete or any kind of an athlete. You look at him, he can't walk to the helicopter. He walks, he can't lift his feet out of the grass. You know, it's only 2 inches at the White House, right? That's not a lot. But you watch him, and it looks like he's walking on toothpicks. He's supposed to be getting us out of that horrible, horrible war that we're very much involved in with Russia and Ukraine. You could do that. You could do that very easily. I believe you could do that I don't believe he could do it because he's just incompetent. But that's a war that should end immediately, not because of one side or the other, because hundreds of thousands of people are being killed. Can you imagine you're in an apartment house and rockets are going into that building and blowing it up and knocking it down? And why should anybody, human beings, these are human, whether they're Russian or Ukrainian or whatever they are, it's got to be stopped. And it can be stopped very easily. It would have never started. If I were president, it would have never started.
So back to Biden, I'm interested. So you think he's failing? He obviously is failing. I think it's clear to everybody. But that would make Kamala Harris the candidate?
Well, not really. I mean, I guess they'd have maybe a free-for-all. A lot of people say she has to remain for certain reasons the candidate. She has to. I don't think that's true, actually. I don't think that other people would stand for it. She has some bad moments. Her moments are almost as bad as his. I think his are worse, actually.
Yeah.
But
she seems pretty senile, too.
She speaks in rhyme. You know, it's weird. It's weird. But she has bad moments. And
in rhyme? What do you...
Well, the way she talks, the bus will go here and then the bus will go there because that's what buses do. And it's weird. The whole thing is weird. This is not a president of the United States future. And I think they probably have some kind of a primary and other people will get involved.
Newsom, right? I
mean, could be. I mean, you know, I always got along well with him, believe it or not. But could be him, could be somebody else. It's very hard to take on the Democrat Party. Look at RFK Jr. They're not giving him the vote. I mean, they're saying you have to get a vast number of votes in order to even qualify. They're making it impossible for him. You know, they're essentially rigging the election, which they're very good at.
You know, you've got a Republican mega donor funding one of your main super PACs. You've got Ron DeSantis saying he'd put you in his cabinet. Key allies of Donald Trump are saying they want you to be Trump's running mate. Why are you Republicans' favorite Democrat?
Well, you know, I started out this campaign saying that I wanted to end the toxic polarization that is dividing America, that I think is as dangerous as any time since the American Civil War. And, you know, a lot of people agree with that. A lot of Americans agree with that. They talk about the future in apocalyptical terms because of the division and don't see where there's a good end. And I feel like somebody needs to stand up and stop talking so much, focusing so much on the issues that divide us and talk instead about the values that bring us together. And I will talk to anybody. You know, I'm happy to talk to Donald Trump or Joe Biden. I don't attack either of them personally. I talk about their issues critically.
For Democratic voters, when they hear that a Republican is funding one of your PACs, maybe that gives them pause.
Well, but he's not the only funder of my PAC.
But he's a big one.
Well, yeah, but I've got ones that are equally big who are Democrats. I think that's a good thing.
RFK Jr. all of a sudden becoming a thing. Now, very interesting because Joe Biden, it looks like he's losing his facilities. It looks like he's falling apart. He can't remember where he is, can't remember numbers, what day it is. RFK Jr. comes on and he puts this thing out over the weekend and he's jacked. He's in great shape and he's 69 years old. Talk to us a little bit about, do you think you will face Joe Biden in a general election in 2024?
I don't know whether or not he makes it to the gate. I really can't tell you that. That's really the question. Will he make it to the starting gate? He obviously, he's got some problems, some very big problems, physically, mentally. I don't know. I mean, you tell me, is he going to make it to the starting gate? But, you know, they'll come up with somebody. I will say RFK Jr., who I've known not very well, but I've known for a while, and I respect him. A lot of people respect him. He's got some very important points to be made. No, he's a respected person. He's at 21, they debate? 22, I saw just now.
Should they debate, sir?
That's a lot for somebody that came in with absolutely no chance of winning.
Should they debate?
Would you serve in a GOP administration, given the number of Republicans who actively support you and support your policies, I could see a scenario where you could possibly serve on either side. Is that possible?
I would doubt it, but I'm not looking to get into government except if I can actually fix the government. And I think one place that I can do that from is the presidency.
And there's no other option for you to do that? I know that you don't have a plan B at the moment.
I definitely would not welcome that. And I'm not going to say that would never happen but I would never be happy. I would never be happy doing something like that. If you're talking about if somebody out, hypothetically offered me to run EPA, or HHS, would I do it? Probably not, but, I'm not going to absolutely say not. But it's not why I'm running. I'm intending to win.
I understand.
And I wouldn't want to.
You would be such a powerful force in the EPA given your background. I'd be surprised. I bet a lot of people would welcome you in that role. But of course, we are talking about the presidency right now.
Should Biden and RFK debate? Should Biden have a Democrat debate? The Democrats don't want to put him up for a debate because I guess they're afraid he'll look weaker than he actually is.
Well, I just don't think that they'll allow him to debate anybody. I mean, you could put up a child. I don't think they'll allow him to debate. They're not going to allow it to happen.
As a lifelong Democrat, are you worried that you will be taking 10, maybe 20% of Biden's votes?
I hope to take votes from both President Biden and President Trump.
Look at the stats that shows you have 48% approval with Republicans and you have about 14% approval with Democrats. So Donald Trump's going to look at you as a threat if he does in fact get the nomination. Are you ready for him to come after you?
Yeah, I feel like I have my own moral center, and I'm not going to engage in the bitterness. I hope Donald Trump will dispute me on the issues, and that we can all talk about the issues that affect America and what's happening to the middle class, the systematic destruction of the middle class.
You agree on a lot.
There are areas of agreements, and there's areas that I have agreement with President Biden. So I think people are tired of the vitriol, and I'm not going to engage in that.
Absolutely. This isn't a prosecution. This is a persecution. It's really a sad day in American politics that you have the Department of Justice that has targeted a former president. And the idea that you have a sitting president who's taking bribes from Ukraine. We've got bank account numbers. We've got transactions. And nothing's being done. And so that's why I dropped the articles of impeachment against Biden. And enough is enough. The American people, quite frankly, are going to elect President Trump to be the next president of the United States, and I don't think Biden will even be the Democratic nominee.
You think Robert F. Kennedy is going to be the nominee?
Well, we'll see. I think the vultures are circling, if you will. I think you see a lot of Democrats not saying anything to defend Biden, and I think that's an indicator that they're waiting for the next shoe to drop, and he will not be the nominee. This is going to be Trump. This is Trump's primary to win. This is Trump's general election to win, and the latest polling data shows that.
If Carrie Lake's not President Trump's VP, if that's not the selection, you could do a lot better in a coalition ticket of Trump and Kennedy, right?
I'm just not sure I want to run against anybody else. I sort of like this one. And by the way, we're leading him by a lot. But just think.
I've been repeatedly asked whether I'd consider being Donald Trump's vice presidential pick, and I would not.
But in any GOP administration, would you serve cabinet, anything like that?
I don't know. I don't know.
Have you seen the Trump mugshot?
Yeah, I did see it.
What'd you think?
It was an interesting and probably very shrewd decision for him to put on that very defiant face. I think it's very popular with his base.
Do you think the mugshot appeals to the Democrat base in any way?
I had a mugshot when I was arrested in Puerto Rico in 2001 when I was doing a protest against the Navy on a lawsuit that I eventually won that got the Navy out of Vieques. But when you're arrested and you get the mugshot, you have a strategic decision about how you want to look. I wondered whether he practiced it in front of a mirror or whether he was just angry at the time and that reflected what he did. But I thought, from a strategic point of view, it worked very well for him.
Well, joining us to share her thoughts is former Arizona gubernatorial candidate, former broadcaster Kari Lake. She's just written and released her first book out this week, Unafraid, Just Getting Started. Kari, it's good to talk with you. Steve Bannon said this week that Robert Kennedy Jr. would be an excellent choice as Donald Trump's vice presidential candidate. So what are your thoughts on that? Go with a Democrat?
Well, I think it's funny, it shows that we're almost beyond Democrat versus Republican. We are now communism and globalism versus Americanism. And I've been hearing the, fake news media attacking Robert Kennedy Jr., calling him a MAGA Democrat. I mean, they just don't want outsiders in the political machine. They don't want outsiders coming into the swamp and draining the swamp, whether they be outsiders who are Democrats or outsiders who are Republican. They want just the pre-approved, controllable, easily blackmailed, easily bribed people like Joe Biden and the whole swamp system down there. I think Robert F. Kennedy has done amazing things. His book is incredible, exposing Dr. Fauci and the fraud that he is. And I think he's an incredible man. I don't believe in a lot of what he espouses. I think ideologically, politically, we have many differences. And I think that he and President Trump probably do as well. But I do believe that President Trump most likely respects RFK Jr. and vice versa.
Well, that's because he's a anti-deep state.
Oh, no country can survive if it can't control its borders, and we're not doing that. The good news is this, that everybody that I talked to there said that this is easy to stop. That the way to stop it is very, very simple, and that they've been doing it before. Now, I didn't like to hear this because I'm not a big fan of Donald Trump. I did not like his wall. But what the Border Patrol and everybody else said is, you don't need to build a physical barrier from San Diego, 2,200 miles to Brownsville, Texas. You do need a physical barrier in certain places where there's high density populations. The rest of it you can monitor with ground monitoring, very, very sophisticated surveillance and ground monitoring systems. Many of those were put up during the Trump administration, but for some reason, the Biden administration, when it came in, took down the towers and they removed the ground sensing systems. This is not something that, as a Democrat, that I want to hear. And then, once it got out that this is an open border and the cartels saw that there's a huge profit opportunity here, the flow has just increased exponentially. But we can stop it. During the Trump administration, the crossings at Yuma were about 10 to 25 a day at most. Now, as I said, they're 200 to 800 a day. So, we can solve this problem, but we need to do it in a way that's sensible, that's common sense, and that is not causing this terrible, terrible humanitarian crisis. From where I sat on the border, there's a tree that you can see on the other side of the fence, but it's in U.S. territory. It's called the rape tree. And it's where the cartels extract their final payment from women who come across, sometimes from children. The Border Patrol watches helplessly while they do this. I talked to people, this Peruvian family that I talked to that had lost their life savings because the cartels rob them, they beat them, they extort them, they exploit them, and ultimately they rape them. And this is a humanitarian crisis that that we're creating through government negligence, and we need to end it for everybody's sake.
Why do you think that our government could be involved in this evidence?
Listen, The Warren Commission, obviously, which was run by Alan Dulles, who was the head of the CIA, who my uncle fired, found that it was a lone shooter, which was Lee Harvey Oswald. But when Congress, a congressional committee, reinvestigated between 1977 and 1979 the House Select Assassinations Committee, they concluded, and they saw a lot more documentation and had a lot more witnesses than the Warren Commission ever saw. They concluded that my uncle was killed by a conspiracy. And most of the people, for example, Richard Schweitzer, who was the head of the committee, publicly said JFK, the President of the United States, the CIA was involved in the murder of the President of the United States. And that's a quotation. Most of the people on that committee at that time believed it was the CIA, that it was believed certain people in the CIA.
You were 7 at the time? 7 or 8?
I was 10 when my uncle was killed. I was 14 when my father was killed. And today there's overwhelming evidence. I mean, in fact,
why don't the government needs to release all of the files on it and let be transparent. Let us see the.
Yeah, well, that's a good question. There's still, the law requires there's a law that requires that all the records of John Kennedy's assassination be released to the public 10 years ago. So they're still holding 5,000 documents. President Biden promised when he was elected that he was going to release those documents. President Trump promised that he would, but the CIA doesn't want them to. And so the question that I think Americans have a right to ask, including members of, my father and uncle's family, is why not? What is it that you don't want to see 60 years later? And by the way, the last tranche of documents released had documentation in there that finally got even the New York Times to admit that Lee Harvey Oswald was a CIA asset, that he was working for the CIA. So, if the Warren Commission had known that back in 1964, they would have had a very different time. And the House Assassinations Committee never knew that. Mm-hmm. That was released. We've known that we've had documentation that known that at least a decade. But some of that documentation became overwhelming in this last tranche. And finally, the mainstream media acknowledged that, yeah, he had this relationship with the CIA going back to 1957 or 1958. 3/4 of Americans believe that President Biden is too old to govern effectively. President Trump faces multiple civil and criminal trials. Both of them have favorability ratings that are deep in negative territory. That's what two-party politics has given us. And that's why we need to pry loose from the hammerlock of the corrupt powers in Washington, D.C., and make this nation ours again. But there's a sacrifice that everyone, including myself, have to make if we're going to reunite America. We're going to have to surrender the kind of political addiction that is ultimately at the root of all of these divisions. And that's the addiction to taking sides. Our nation's renewal is going to begin when we start to treat each other with respect. Only then will we be able to step outside our tired, stuck debates. We can ask the questions then that nobody thought to ask. We can discover solutions that were right in front of our face. We will listen not just to the other side, but to those who are apart from any side. In a two-sided conflict, both parties have a kind of mutual dependency. Each side depends on the other to define themselves as good guys, in contrast to the other side, who, of course, are the bad guys. Well, if you're a team good, then you'll do anything, no matter how unscrupulous, to defeat team evil. And that's why we've seen both parties sacrificing their core values and the foundational canons of democracy in an all-out struggle for power. In a war against evil, any means justifies the end. The result is that we ourselves become evil if we participate in that battle. The child who is obsessed with hating a parent becomes that parent. As I've surrendered my attachment to taking sides over the past 6 months, I've been able to listen with new ears to people with whom I disagree and to see solutions that would otherwise have been invisible. I'll give you an example. 6 months ago, I thought that an open border was a humanitarian policy, and that if you were for sealing the border, it meant that you were probably a xenophobe and maybe a racist. I was wrong. How did I learn I was wrong? It wasn't just that I listened. It wasn't just that I listened to the other side. It was when I actually visited the border and listened to people who weren't on either side. My views changed as I spoke to Border Patrol officers, to local officials, to local sheriffs, aid workers, and to the migrants themselves. I saw that no one party has a monopoly on wisdom, and none of the simplistic narratives actually contain the whole truth. My promise to you as president is that I'm going to do this on every issue. I'm going to listen to stakeholders. I'm going to listen to the stakeholders from every side and beyond any side. I'm going to uphold my moral convictions, of course, absolutely, but I'll hold my own opinions lightly.
If it's not him, who's it going to be?
He's also the most corrupt president in history, without question. I don't know. There'll be a fight. I don't think that Kamala gets it handed. You know, a lot of people are so afraid to go against her. I don't think it gets handed. I think all of a sudden everybody would start jumping in. She'd have to earn it. It'd be very hard to earn. But I don't know. You know, they're the same 5 or 6 people that you report on and you see all the time. I don't see that. No, I don't see it. No.
Gavin Newsom.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah.
I think so. Yeah.
You announced in Philadelphia that you're going to run for president as an independent. You're from one of the most famous Democratic families of all time. How big a step was it to say, you know what, today, sorry family, I'm going to have to take a step away?
It was very painful for me. I mean, I was raised in the Democratic Party. My father, my uncles were the leaders of the party. My great-grandfather, Honey Fitz, was the first Irish Catholic mayor of Boston. My other great-grandfather, Patrick Kennedy, was a ward boss for the Democratic Party in Boston. I think it's the right thing right now because we're seeing that, you know, it's the same corporate donors that control both of the parties. And the parties are in paralysis. They cannot, within that party system, they're locked in this war with each other, and they're polarizing the American public, and we need a strategy for unity. We need a strategy for bringing people together. And what I've found traveling the country, even among the most extreme Democrats and Republicans, there's still more that we have in common than the issues that are being used to drive us apart. Everybody wants a clean environment. Everybody wants to take care of our veterans. Everybody wants our kids to have a good education. Everybody wants to make sure the regulatory agencies are serving the public interest instead of working for the corporations that they're supposed to regulate. And I think we need somebody who's going to find those areas of agreement, the values we agree on, rather than focus on these little issues that have us at each other's throats.
And Ted Kennedy, believe it or not, was a friend of mine. I met him through Palm Beach. They had a big house, a compound. They call it the Kennedy compound. And I had a very nice house also. But I got to know him very well, and he liked me. And I one time asked him, who's the smartest guy in the U.S. Senate? He was a smart guy, by the way, Ted Kennedy, very smart, great politician. And I said, who's the smartest guy in the Senate? And we were friends. I did him a big favor, I will tell you that. Big favor, really big. And it wasn't hard for me to do, but it was very big and important for him. And he liked me, and I liked him. I said, who's the smartest in the Senate? And he gave me a name, but I won't tell you because I can't stand the guy, actually. Still around. Can't stand him.
I was disappointed to hear that name. I said, who's the dumbest in the Senate? He goes, I don't know, let's see. Probably Joe. I said, who's Joe? He said, Joe Biden. This is 25, 30 years ago, a long time ago. I think it was one of the early times I've ever heard the name. And that was in prime time for him, but this is in prime time. Joe gave us the war on Israel and the war on American energy. What he did to our energy was we were energy independent. Think of it, as president, I will shut off Iranian oil and I will turn on American oil, and we will drill, baby, drill, and we'll get things back to where they are supposed to be.
I've dealt so intimately with these regulatory agencies. Usually when a politician comes into office in Washington, they vow to clean up the swamp. But they get there and they're intimidated by these agencies that may have 30,000 or 50,000 employees, and they have no idea how to reform them. So they bring in somebody to run that agency, somebody who's safe, which is usually somebody from industry. So President Trump promised to reform Washington, but he came into office saying, I'm going to, even he even talked about medicine and about vaccines and these kind of things. He then took $1 million from Pfizer, and he appointed a Pfizer partner, Scott Gottlieb, to run FDA. And another Pfizer handpicked nominee, Alex Azar, right from the middle of the pharmaceutical industry, to run HHS. And Gottlieb then ushered through the Pfizer product and made $88 billion for his company, and then left FDA to rejoin the Pfizer board. That's not ending the swamp. That is making the swamp even deeper. And I know when I go in there how to fix DOT, how to fix HHS, NIH, CDC, EPA, all of the three later agencies, because I've litigated against them and I've been thinking for 40 years, how do you unravel corporate capture at these agencies? And I know how to do it. I know how to reorganize those agencies to end the revolving doors, to end these financial entanglements with the industries they're supposed to regulate. And in many cases, I know the specific individuals in those agencies who need to be moved out. And that's why I think I'm in better shape than anybody else to reform, to get the kind of reforms that the American people want.
House Republicans continue to fight. The left is a cult.
I don't want to hear it from Republicans. We'll beat the shit out of them.
Time out. Taylor, I need you to start
helping your party. Anarchy across America.
Radical
Democrats. Republicans. Republicans. Left.
Yeah, I was fed up too. And that's why I'm running for president of the United States as an independent. I'm Robert F. Kennedy Jr., and I approve this message. I'll look at the evidence and the arguments, and I'll choose not the easy path, not the established path, but the right path. In making an independent run for president, I take inspiration from the one other president who did not have a political party. And that president was George Washington. In his farewell address, Washington issued a prescient warning about the disastrous potential of party politics. Inevitably, he said, political parties will be taken over by a cunning, ambitious, unprincipled minority who will serve the interests of the party rather than the interests of the nation and usurp for themselves the reins of government. Washington's dire prediction has certainly come true. I intend to wrest the reins of both parties and return power to the American people.
Remember
Remember in the prior election, Joe Biden got 51% of the vote, Donald Trump 46% of the vote. Why does this matter? Because of these swing states, Brian.
Yeah, so here's the difference on the national poll. Trump, despite 91 charges and 4 indictments, is a choice, even when you break it down, of the majority of the American public so far as we look at it.
Yeah,
when we look at the battleground states, this is the key.
Yeah, so a little bit of a recap right here in Nevada. Biden won this by 3 points, a couple thousand separating Georgia and Arizona. And then you got Wisconsin that he won by 1 point. You got 3 points in Michigan, and then you got 2 points in Pennsylvania.
Right now, this is the only place that Biden's winning. How extraordinary is this? Georgia is suing him, by the way, after the way he acted after losing the election. I'm talking about the President of the United States. And so the people of Georgia say, I'd rather have him than Joe Biden. But there are some mulligans, some outliers that are really going to mess with this race.
Well, because you got some folks that are going to just want to be disruptors in the race. They
outside the major parties.
Outside the major parties. So RFK said, look, I tried to do it within the Democratic Party. I tried to work with you guys, but y'all pushed me out, so now I'm in. Apparently, he's getting 24% support in 6 swing states, Brian.
Right. He said, I don't even want to run as no labels. I'm going to run as RFK Jr. And we'll see. I don't even want the green label. This is the highest mark for a independent candidate since Ross Perot, before he dropped out and got back in.
Since the early 1980s, there's been a systematic attack on our middle class. And the coup de grace was the lockdown. The lockdown was the biggest shift in wealth in human history. And I'm going to tell you about that in a second. And I blame President Trump for the lockdown.
Is there any more consideration to a national lockdown to keep people in their homes?
I don't think so. Essentially, you've done that in California. You've done that in New York. Those are really 2 hotbeds. Those are probably the 2 hottest of them all in terms of hotspots. I don't think so, because you go out to the Midwest, you go out to other locations, and they're watching it on television, but they don't have the same problems. They don't have, by any means, the same problem. New York, California, Miami, the governor's doing an excellent job. Governor DeSantis in Florida. We have some pretty hot spots in Florida, too. But we're and the state of Washington, of course. But that was largely, if you look at it, it was 1 nursing home that had problems like you wouldn't believe. So no, we're working with the governors, and I don't think we'll ever find that necessary.
Now, a lot of people say, and President Trump gets blamed for a lot of things that he didn't do, and he gets blamed for some things that he did do. But the worst thing that he did to this country, to our civil rights, to our economy, to the middle class in this country, was the lockdown. Now, President Trump, in fairness, let me just make this point, will tell people, well, the lockdown wasn't my idea. It was my bureaucrats rolled me on it. I was saying we shouldn't do it. But that's not a good enough excuse. He was the President of the United States.
In hotspots across the South and West, we've seen slow improvements from their recent weekly peaks. Arizona's weekly case counts have dropped 37%. That's a tremendous drop, and the governor and the state have done a fantastic job. Down 37%. Texas down 18.7%. I was there a couple of days ago. And Florida, 21.2% drop. So that's a tremendous job that they're all doing. As we begin to contain the virus in these states, we must focus on new flare-ups in the states where the case numbers have risen, including Georgia, Mississippi, Tennessee, Oklahoma, Missouri, and I think you'll find that they're soon going to be very much under control. Meanwhile, 18 states continue to have very low case numbers and low test positivity rates, under 5%. Alaska, Connecticut, Delaware, Illinois, Maine, Maryland, Massachusetts, Michigan, Montana, New Hampshire, New Jersey, New York, North Dakota, Oregon, Rhode Island, Vermont, West Virginia, and Wyoming. It's under 5. Even in these states, however, where the virus is under control and at a very low number, Americans should continue to be vigilant, be careful, in order to prevent the new hotspots from opening up or any new hotspots from opening up in those states. To that end, I urge all Americans to continue to socially distance, wash your hands, wear a mask when you cannot avoid crowded places, and to protect the elderly. Very, very important, protect the elderly. It's much different. Young children have very strong immune systems. We've learned how strong they are. But protect the elderly. The average age of those who succumb to the virus is 78 years old. That's the average age. It's important for all Americans to recognize that a permanent lockdown is not a viable path toward producing the result that you want, or certainly not a viable path forward, and would ultimately inflict more harm than it would prevent. As we're seeing in foreign countries around the world where cases are once again surging, you have many places where we thought they were under control and doing a great job, and they are doing a great job, but this is a very tough, invisible enemy. Lockdowns do not prevent infection in the future. They just don't. It comes back, many times comes back. The purpose of a lockdown is to buy time to build capacity, especially as it with respect to hospitals, learn more about the disease and develop effective treatments as we did in the United States. We're doing very well with the vaccines and the therapeutics. Countries where there have been very significant flare-ups over the last short period of time are Spain, Germany, France, Australia, Japan, and also, as you probably heard, in Hong Kong, they've had some very serious flare-ups. Japan has gone, a lot of six-fold flare-up. It's a lot, but they'll get it under control. In our current phase, we must focus on protecting those at highest risk while allowing younger and healthier Americans to resume work and school with careful precautions. Ideally, we want to open those schools. We want to open them.
Trump locked down 3.3 million businesses. And, what did that do? It shifted everything to Amazon. 41% of the black-owned businesses that were closed during COVID will never reopen. Mm-hmm. A lot of those businesses had 3 generations of equity in them. I drove through Lee Harvard, which is one of the poorest districts in Cleveland, and it was a booming area 5 years ago. Today, every single one of those stores is boarded up. And, I talk to people every day in the African-American community whose businesses were wiped out, and that's what happened. We shifted $4 trillion in wealth from the working poor and the middle class to the super rich in this country. We strip mined the black community of its equity during this pandemic. And, how do you rebuild that now? That is the big issue for our country. How are we going to rebuild equity with the working poor in this country? If you like this video and you want to learn more about me and the movement that we're building, please go to Kennedy24.com.
We had more revenue with lower taxes than we did with higher taxes.
You also added $8 trillion to the national debt. Your GOP challenger, Nikki Haley, made that point, saying, quote, "The truth is that Biden didn't do this to us. Republicans did this to us." Does she have a point?
We had a thing happen to us. We had the greatest economy in history, and then we got hit with COVID. And we had to keep this beautiful thing going. And if I didn't do that, if we didn't put some money in, nobody knew what COVID was. Remember, this was a new thing that came in. Somebody said it's dust coming in from China. It came from China. They tried and denied it, or they tried for a little while, and we didn't let it. It came from Wuhan, actually, which now they agree. Everybody's now agreeing that it came from Wuhan. I said that years ago. But we had to do things that were very severe. We had to let some money come out. We were on the verge of doing something that was amazing.
And as Harry Truman said, the buck stops here. On May 2nd, 2020, 600 doctors signed a letter to President Trump begging him not to allow the lockdowns. And they said because at that time, all of the pandemic protocols anywhere in the world, the WHO, CDC, everywhere, the European Health Agency, all says you never do mass lockdowns. It causes much worse havoc and deaths and injuries than if you do the standard protocol, which is you lock down the sick, you protect the vulnerable, and you let everybody else go back to work. Otherwise, you are going to wreak havoc.
We were going to have energy at a level bigger than Russia and Saudi Arabia combined. That energy was going to be sold to Europe and all other places. The prices would have come down. We were going to make a fortune, and we were going to start paying off debt. Instead, we got hit with COVID. People didn't need oil because nobody was driving all over the world. I mean, frankly, it was a disaster. What China did to the world with COVID is something that we're going to get to the bottom of, and they have to pay something back. You know, nobody can pay back the cost of all those lives and all the money that was lost, but nobody can pay back the lives and all of the damage that was caused.
And of course, you know, and I wrote about it for the, you know, on Instagram. I was writing every day. I was citing these economic studies that showed every point in unemployment you get 37,000 excess deaths from heart attacks, suicides, you know, plus imprisonments. And I was writing about this, and they dumped me from the social. They said that's misinformation, but it was not. But people were saying it. People knew it. It wasn't just me. And we now know, of course, that it's true. There's now study after study, and every comparison between the states and nations that locked down compared to those who didn't, you know, has shown the ones who locked down, the more you locked down, the worse you got. Worse COVID deaths, worse excess deaths.
We were going to make a fortune off our energy. We were going to send the energy to Europe. Europe was going to pay us tremendous amounts of money. And I'll tell you, you would have never had the Ukraine monster at all. It would have never happened. Russia would have never got, just by sheer force of personality. But beyond personality, what happened is when oil hit $100 a barrel, and by the way, it's right there right now again, Putin makes a fortune on this war. You know, everybody said, oh, he can't afford it. If Biden allowed my policies to stay in place, oil would right now be at $40 a barrel, and Putin wouldn't be able to afford the war.
Sweden's numbers came out this week. Sweden was the only country in Europe that didn't lock down. It had the lowest excess deaths in Europe, which is very predictable. The nation, you know, the nation that led lockdowns was us, and we had the highest body count of COVID on Earth. We have 4.2% of the world's population. We had 16% of the COVID deaths. At some point, even the media is going to have to say, stop saying this was a success story. But the health issues were almost dwarfed by the economic cataclysm that befell our country.
My fellow Americans, tonight I want to speak with you about our nation's unprecedented response to the coronavirus outbreak that started in China and is now spreading throughout the world. Today, the World Health Organization officially announced that this is a global pandemic. We have been in frequent contact with our allies, and we are marshaling the full power of the federal government and the private sector to protect the American people. This is the most aggressive and comprehensive effort to confront a foreign virus in modern history. I am confident that by counting and continuing to take these tough measures, we will significantly reduce the threat to our citizens, and we will ultimately and expeditiously defeat this virus. From the beginning of time, nations and people have faced unforeseen challenges, including large-scale and very dangerous health threats. This is the way it always was and always will be. It only matters how you respond, and we are responding with great speed and professionalism. Our team is the best anywhere in the world. At the very start of the outbreak, we instituted sweeping travel restrictions on China and put in place the first federally mandated quarantine in over 50 years. We declared a public health emergency and issued the highest level of travel warning on other countries as the virus spread its horrible infection. And taking early, intense action, we have seen dramatically fewer cases of the virus in the United States than are now present in Europe. The European Union failed to take the same precautions and restrict travel from China and other hotspots. As a result, a large number of new clusters in the United States were seeded by travelers from Europe. After consulting with our top government health professionals, I have decided to take several strong but necessary actions to protect the health and well-being of all Americans. To keep new cases from entering our shores, we will be suspending all travel from Europe to the United States for the next 30 days. The new rules will go into effect Friday at midnight. These restrictions will be adjusted subject to conditions on the ground. There will be exemptions for Americans who have undergone appropriate screenings, and these prohibitions will not only apply to the tremendous amount of trade and cargo, but various other things as we get approval. Anything coming from Europe to the United States is what we are discussing. These restrictions will also not apply to the United Kingdom. At the same time, we are monitoring the situation in China and South Korea, and as their situation improves, we will reevaluate the restrictions and warnings that are currently in place for a possible early opening. Earlier this week, I met with the leaders of health insurance industry who have agreed to waive all co-payments for coronavirus treatments, extend insurance coverage to these treatments, and to prevent surprise medical billing. We are cutting massive amounts of red tape to make antiviral therapies available in record time. These treatments will significantly reduce the impact and reach of the virus. Additionally, last week I signed into law an $8.3 billion funding bill to help CDC and other government agencies fight the virus and support vaccines, treatments, and distribution of medical supplies. Testing capabilities are expanding rapidly day by day. We are moving very quickly. The vast majority of Americans, the risk is very, very low. Young and healthy people can expect to recover fully and quickly if they should get the virus. The highest risk is for elderly population with underlying health conditions. The elderly population must be very, very careful. In particular, we are strongly advising that nursing homes for the elderly suspend all medically unnecessary visits. In general, older Americans should also avoid non-essential travel in crowded areas. My administration is coordinating directly with communities with largest outbreaks, and we have issued guidance on school closures, social distancing, and reducing large gatherings. Smart action today will prevent the spread of the virus tomorrow. Every community faces different risks, and it is critical for you to follow the guidelines of your local officials who are working closely with our federal health experts, and they are the best. For all Americans, it is essential that everyone take extra precautions and practice good hygiene. Each of us has a role to play in defeating this virus. Wash your hands, clean often used surfaces, cover your face and mouth if you sneeze or cough, and most of all, if you are sick or not feeling well, stay home. To ensure that working Americans impacted by the virus can stay home without fear of financial hardship, I will soon be taking emergency action, which is unprecedented, to provide financial relief. This will be targeted for workers who are ill, quarantined, or caring for others due to coronavirus. I will be asking Congress to take legislative action to extend this relief. Because of the economic policies that we have put into place over the last 3 years, we have the greatest economy anywhere in the world by far. Our banks and financial institutions are fully capitalized and incredibly strong. Our unemployment is at a historic low. This vast economic prosperity gives us flexibility, reserves, and resources to handle any threat that comes our way. This is not a financial crisis. This is just a temporary moment of time that we will overcome together as a nation and as a world. However, to provide extra support for American workers, families, and businesses, Tonight, I am announcing the following additional actions. I am instructing the Small Business Administration to exercise available authority to provide capital and liquidity to firms affected by the coronavirus. Effective immediately, the SBA will begin providing economic loans in affected states and territories. These low-interest loans will help small businesses overcome temporary economic disruptions caused by the virus. To this end, I am asking Congress to increase funding for this program by an additional $50 billion. Using emergency authority, I will be instructing the Treasury Department to defer tax payments without interest or penalties for certain individuals and businesses negatively impacted. This action will provide more than $200 billion of additional liquidity to the economy. Finally, I am calling on Congress to provide Americans with immediate payroll tax relief. Hopefully, they will consider this very strongly. We are at a critical time in the fight against the virus. We made a life-saving move with early action on China. Now we must take the same action with Europe. We will not delay. I will never hesitate to take any necessary steps to protect the lives, health, and safety of the American people. I will always put the well-being of America first.
Some of your appearances, and during some of the appearances of one Donald Trump, there seems to be some sort of mutual respect going on back and forth. Would you weigh in on if you have a relationship with him, if you're friendly with him, if you've spoken to him? Where does that lie?
I mean, I've known Donald Trump for, 35 years or 40 years. I've sued him a couple of times. I sued him twice to stop him from building golf courses in the New York City reservoir system. But I always had a congenial relationship with him. Even when I was litigating against him, he didn't seem to take it personally. And then and then in 2016, he asked me to serve on a vaccine safety commission, which I agreed to do. But shortly after that, he took $1 million from Pfizer and I guess talked to Bill Gates, at least as Bill Gates claims, and shut down the commission. And he appointed Scott Gottlieb to run FDA, who was a partner of Pfizer, and Alex Azar, who was a handpicked lobbyist essentially for Pfizer, to run HHS. And then Gottlieb, ran this $88 billion product through Operation Warp Speed, got it all approved at FDA, and then left the agency and went back to join the board of Pfizer. So that's, I don't think that Donald Trump did a good job of draining the swamp. But the thing is, I criticize that. I criticize his policies. I think he's criticized for a lot of things he didn't do. And, but I criticize him. I commend him for talking about unraveling the empire and his efforts to do that, to keep us out of war. But in terms of the lockdowns, I think that was a huge mistake for our country. And I think that, the medical decisions that occurred under his watch were a bad mistake. And I criticize those, but I don't criticize him personally. And I try not to criticize Biden personally, too. I think we've had enough of that in our country, and we have to learn how to talk to people with whom we disagree and to be pleasant to them, to be congenial, respectful, and kind.
First question in the news, Trump is obviously facing yet a third federal indictment, but maybe even a fourth coming with the state of Georgia indictment. Do we have a two-tiered justice system? Is this the Biden administration weaponizing the FBI and others to take out his political opponent? And then if you have time, the border, it's a huge problem. What is the Bobby Kennedy border policy?
Well, the border, I was down at the border, and there's a humanitarian crisis there, and it's not good, and we now have the Mexican cartels that are running U.S. border policy. So, I watched 300 people walk across the border
only 2 of those families were from Latin America or Central America, one from Peru and one from Colombia. And in a 2-hour period, I watched 300 people walk across. Each one of those people is going to be given a plane ticket at our government expense to any city they want in the United States. That's how this crazy system works. And meanwhile, people who are legally trying to get in this country, and 7 million people have come across illegally over the past 3 years. It's a crazy policy. And each one of them is paying $15,000, $10,000 to $15,000 to the cartels. They are extorted, they're exploited, they're raped, they're robbed on the way up, and the children are lost. It's a horrible, horrible, horrible humanitarian crisis. And a country with an open border is not a nation. We need to close the border, and then we need to open legal immigration in a way that is going to be beneficial to our country.
Well, why do you suppose the Biden administration has been non-existent and they haven't done a thing about the border? In fact, rolled back some policies that were frankly working. What do you think the motivation behind that is?
I think it's baffling. I don't know, and one thing I don't do is I don't try to look into other people's heads. In my Fauci book, I never question why. I never speculate as to why Anthony Fauci did the things that he did. But I just, all I do is I enumerate them. I tell what I know, what's discernible. I do not, it's incomprehensible to me why we're doing what we're doing at the border. Some of it just seems like petty politics, that, we're going to, because Trump liked the wall, we're going to make sure that the wall's not completed. And because Trump wanted to bar immigration, we consider that racist, and therefore we're going to do the opposite. And I think it's a very, very harmful policy.
And final thought, any final thought on whether or not Trump is being unfairly targeted by various agencies?
Well, the only thing I'd say about that is that I think I'm a former prosecutor, and prosecutors have to be very, very careful in our democracy about prosecuting former presidents. And the reason for that is you don't want to look like, one of the, when we broke with England in 1776, one of the issues that we split over is that oftentimes political opponents of the king would be arrested and detained, and we passed all kinds of laws to make sure that that wouldn't happen in this country. At the same time, in a democracy, you want to make sure that government officials are not above the law, that the law applies to every person. So that's a balance that a prosecutor has to weigh, and you hope that they're doing it in good faith and that they exercise good judgment. And I think that, my impression, and I'm not authority on this because I've never talked to the prosecutors to explore their rationale. But my impression was I was troubled by the New York case. I thought that case was too close to the, kind of a speculative kind of prosecution, that it seemed politically not motivated. I don't know. I haven't heard the prosecutor's side of the story, and I haven't talked to him. I think the case against the president for on the Espionage Act, I don't like the Espionage Act. I think it's always been politically misused. And then there's other optics problems, which is that President Biden also has these, top secret documents, and Mike Pence has them too. And so it looks like one side is being prosecuted more, than the other. And I haven't really looked into it very carefully, but it would be those would be the issues that if I were prosecutor, I'd be looking out for.
Why you held on to those documents when you knew the federal government was seeking them and then had given you a subpoena to return them?
Are you ready? Are you ready? Can I talk?
Yeah, what's
you
the
mind?
answer?
Do you mind?
I would like for you to answer the question.
Okay, it's very simple to answer.
That's why I asked it.
It's very simple you're a nasty person, I'll tell you.
why
Very
you
simple.
held on to the documents?
I was negotiating, and we were talking to Nara.
Well, I think the problem is, number one, he's a bully. And, I don't like bullies, and I don't think America, that's part of America's tradition. I think in many ways he's discredited the American experiment with self-governance. Well, I don't think we should ban billionaires. I think, that's not the way to go about it. We had a 50-year part of our history, which is called the Great Prosperity, when we developed the American middle class, which was the driver of the world economy. It was the driver of our economy. It created happiness and quality of life in our country. And during most of that period, there was a 91% tax on the upper echelon. Right. Well, I haven't made any endorsement. So I'm just kind of I'm watching the debates, I'm watching what's happening to the primaries. My kids are working for Mayor Pete. My cousin Joe is working for Elizabeth Warren. There are a number of other members of my family who are working for Joe Biden. We have relationships with, very strong relationships with most of the candidates. And I kind of go back and forth. I hear them debate. I love Tulsi Gabbard when she talks about our foreign policy. I think, I'm most closely aligned with her vision for foreign policy than any of the other ones.
It's a new Trump feud with Caroline Kennedy. In a new interview, the Republican frontrunner attacked America's ambassador to Japan. Who is our chief negotiator? Essentially, it is Caroline Kennedy. I mean, give me a break, Trump said. She doesn't even know she's alive. Ouch. And look at Joe go. The vice president showed that he's got plenty of energy as he ponders a presidential run. The 72-year-old greeted supporters at a Labor Day parade in Pittsburgh, looking more and more like a candidate. You go, girl. And Hillary's team says they're working to soften her image. She'll appear on The Tonight Show with Jimmy Fallon this week and on Ellen. Last time she was on the show back in 2007, she and Ellen had a bowl-off.
All right.
Before thousands were brutally killed, including Americans. Before Iran helped Hamas plan the attack, killing Americans. Before Biden gave billions of taxpayers' money to Iran. Trump played hardball with Iran. Destroyed ISIS. Kept the Middle East at peace. Kept us out of endless wars. Through strength.
History shows very plainly that evil only respects one thing: unyielding strength. When I'm back in the White House, our enemies will know if you spill a drop of American blood, we will spill a gallon of yours.
President Trump, the strength we need to make America strong again.
I'm Donald J. Trump, and I approve this message.
To make the case, you say unity ticket, Trump, Kennedy. Tell us about it.
Look, I would love Carrie Lake or maybe one of these powerful women to be his vice president. However, I see a very compelling reason, although I know Bobby Kennedy's terrible on guns, he ain't great on Ukraine, but he talks about going after the administrative and deep state in a very significant way, led by the pharmaceutical industry. If we put together a unity ticket of Trump and Kennedy, it would be insurmountable. We would bring over many of the populists on the left, many of the people that don't agree, with Charlie Kirk and Steve Bannon and Donald J. Trump, but that's what a unity ticket is. And I think we could get 2/3 to 70% of the American people on back of what we have to do in taking on the Chinese Communist Party, taking on the deep state, taking on big pharma, taking on big tech, taking on big media. Everybody that's it shouldn't be lost on people. Bobby Kennedy comes on Tucker last week and has a throwdown interview. And next thing you know, Tucker Carlson's given the bums the best and biggest show in the history of Fox. O'Reilly wasn't bigger. Megyn Kelly wasn't bigger. Hannity at the top of his game is not bigger. Glenn Beck was not better. They gave him the bum's rush. Didn't even show him the courtesy of of letting him announce this on his own due time and having a couple of shows for his audience to take care of his goodbyes. Gave him the bum's rush, and one of the last big interviews he did was with Bobby Kennedy. That's how much they fear that platform. That's how much they fear the voice of Bobby Kennedy. If you put Kennedy and Trump together, that's the dynamic doing. And people understand there's a lot of issues that separate us, but there's enough that unites us that could take on the administrative state.
Well, I mean, the fourth branch of government, the Leviathan, I think is the number one issue when it comes to policy for the next Republican president, if we're able to win.
The Harvard-Harris poll, which is Mark Penn's outfit, the gold standard poll, showed 22% also nationwide, and showed me at young people under 36 years of age that I'm 10 points ahead of President Trump and President Biden, which is extraordinary. And then the New York Times Siena poll, which is a very, very powerful poll. A lot of the national polls are about 700 to 1,000 people. The Harvard poll, the New York Times poll, I think was 3,600. There are over 3,000 people, so it was really a very, very strong sampling. And that showed that in the 8 battleground states that show me an average of 24%. With 20, and remember, all I have to do is get to about 37%, because you just need a plurality, and it's winner take all with the electoral votes. So I need to get to 270 electoral votes. I don't even need to win majorities. I just need to get up to about 37%, and that will put me ahead of the other two contenders. And if I can do that in certain enough states, I can, I will win. And we have 12 months to do that.
Mr. President, when will you announce who your VP is?
Not for a while. We have so many great people in the Republican Party, but not for a while.
What criteria are you using to identify who your running mate is?
Always, it's got to be one thing. It's got to be who would be a good president. You always have to think that, because, in case of emergency, things happen, right? No matter who you are, things happen. It's got to be number one.
Who is your running mate?
Well, I have a lot of good people. We have a lot of really good people.
So you haven't decided who it is?
I have a lot of good ideas, but I haven't, and there's no reason
So
to do
you
that
haven't
quickly.
told that person, you're my person.
I speak to everybody. I speak to everybody. You know, I called Tim Scott this because a lot of people like Tim Scott. I called him and I said, "You're a much better candidate for me than you are for yourself." When I watched him, he was fine, he was good, but he was very low key, et cetera, et cetera. I watched him in the last week defending me and sticking up for me and fighting for me. I said, "Man," I said, "you're a much better person for me than you are for yourself," because for himself he was low key. For me, he's been a real tiger. He's been incredible, and others have too.
So maybe it's Tim Scott.
Well, it could be a lot of people, but it was interesting. I was watching Tim. I've been watching, for a while. I watched him campaign as a candidate, but I watched him over the last 2 weeks. As you know, he endorsed me, fully endorsed me, gave me a beautiful endorsement. And he has been really strong in terms of that. No, but that has nothing to do, I don't want anybody to take even any inference, but it's incredible. Kristi Noem has been incredible fighting for me. She said I'd never run against him because I can't beat him. That was a very nice thing to say.
What was that
It's
story
very
that
bad.
your team reached out to RFK Jr.?
It's a false story, no. It's a false
You
story.
never reached out to
what? I
RFK
like him
Jr.?
a lot. Nope, never happened.
The latest speculation is that maybe you would be the VP for Trump. Would you ever do that?
I don't think that my marriage would survive it.
I think he's right.
Just president. That's all you want.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much.
All right, now I want to go to Vice President for a second. You know, I've written in the post that your short list ought to be Tom Cotton, Mike Gallagher, Joni Ernst, Mike Pompeo, Dan Sullivan, or Robert O'Brien. The latter, of course, would bring you Latter-day Saint votes in Arizona and Nevada. Are you going to name your vice president before the convention? Are you going to give us a list of people you're going to consider? And what do you make of my list?
I think I'd make up a list. Some of those names are great. I agree. And maybe not every single one of them. You understand. But no, I think some of the names you have there are great. And we'll have somebody that's really going to be very, very popular and very, very good. I know a lot of great people. We have a lot of great Republicans.
Now, the biggest issue he faces is getting on the ballot in every single state. He's on the ballot in 2 states, New Hampshire and Utah. I'd also asked him about something I'd heard President Trump had called him early on and asked him about being his VP. I asked if it were true. Take a look. If he asked you that today, what would your response be?
I would not take that job. I'm flattered that President Trump would offer it to me, but it's not something that I'm interested in.
Did he reach out, or his team?
People from the team have reached out to me.
The Trump campaign denies any such approach. Chris LaCivita, a senior advisor to the former president, says, just want to get this quote right, no one from the Trump campaign ever approached RFK Jr. or ever will. Now, clearly Mr. Kennedy has a different version of those events. But I would find it difficult to see Kennedy going into a Trump cabinet, though they do share some, I suppose, common ground in terms of skepticism of the US aid to Ukraine, in terms of skepticism about COVID vaccines, frankly. Those sort of issues provide some sliver of common ground.
What was the story that your team reached out to RFK Jr.?
It's a false story, no. It's a false
You
story.
never reached out to RFK
I like
Jr.?
him a lot. Nope, never happened.
RFK is a radical liberal who happens to be anti-vax. That may be the one policy where he leans a little bit right. But he was for open borders for his entire life. He's against farmers. He was a radical environmentalist. He was super anti-gun. You know, he says he's changed his mind. He's changed his mind on everything that he did for decades. Everything magically 6 months ago. I don't believe that. So, you know, he's a phenomenal alternative to Joe Biden as a Democrat, but he is a radical Democrat. Again, the only place where he's historically ever differed from anything coming out of the Biden administration is that he's anti-vaccine. That's not enough. I think once people look at the record, it will speak for itself. So I think he's a great alternative as a Democrat. You know, maybe if people want to vote that way. But if you're going to vote for RFK, I see he's trying to get libertarians now. I'm like, again, he's anti-vax, but literally everything else would not be libertarian. But, you know, it's all part of the machine to try to stop Trump, as far as I'm concerned. And again, Yeah, I think he's certainly a better viable option, than Joe Biden for the Democrats, but he's no conservative. Let's not kid ourselves.
Let me ask you about your family. Many members of your family have been critical of your campaign. Prominent members put out a statement that said, quote, "The decision of our brother Bobby to run as a third-party candidate against Joe Biden is dangerous to our country. Bobby might share the same name as our father, but he does not share the same values, vision, or judgment. Today's announcement is deeply saddening for us. We denounce his candidacy and believe it to be perilous for our country." It was signed by Rory Kennedy, Kerry Kennedy, Joseph P. Kennedy, Kathleen Kennedy Townsend.
I don't begrudge them those feelings. I think they're very scared that President Trump is going to get elected, and they consider me a danger to the country and the republic because their assumption was that I would take more votes away from President Biden from President Trump. So
Donald Trump has to win independents, and that's why the VP pick is so important. Having someone out there who can litigate these cases going on in a way that is credibly received by independents and suburban women.
What qualities are you looking for in your vice presidential pick?
Well, always the first quality has to be somebody that you think will be a good president, because if something should happen, you have to have somebody that's going to be a great president. A lot of people are talking about that gentleman right over there. And he's been so great. He's been such a great advocate. I have to say, this is in a very positive way, Tim Scott. He has been much better for me than he was for himself. I watched his campaign, and he doesn't like talking about himself, but boy, does he talk about Trump. And I said, I called him. I said, Tim, you're better for me than you were for yourself. But he's fantastic, and he's a fantastic person.
Someone who can step into the role.
Most importantly, you have to view that.
The audience has been asked who they think would be a good choice, and various names came up. One of them was, of course, Vivek Ramaswamy. He's made a big splash. Ron DeSantis, who's making an appearance today in South Carolina, we just found out. Obviously, Tim Scott, Byron Donalds, and a big presence here for Tulsi Gabbard. Very interesting. And Kristi Noem as well, I should say. Right. Are they all on your short list? And when can we expect that you will announce your choice?
The one thing that always surprises me is that the VP choice has absolutely no impact. It's whoever the president is. It just seems. I remember when Sarah Palin was actually picked, and she did have a big up, and then they just went after her at a level that nobody's seen. The Republicans themselves went after what they did.
But you'll be a one-term president because you've already served, so you can only serve for one term, although they say you'll never leave office. I assume that you'll never leave. There'll never be another election
don't
again.
Do it. He'll never leave. He's never going. Oh, these people.
So for that reason, it is important who you pick.
So I think it's very important. But look, first is that, as we said, it has to do with whoever is, it's a very important position for that reason. You would like to get somebody that could help you from the voter standpoint. And honestly, all of those people are good. They're all good. They're all solid. And I always say, I want people with common sense, because there's so many things happening in this country that don't make sense. Who wants an open border? Who wants high interest rates? Who wants all electric vehicles? And they're fine, but you want to have choice. You want to go to combustion. You want to go to any hybrid. I think the hybrid are much better from that standpoint. But we were talking about faucets. We're talking about so much. It's all based on common sense. We want a strong military. We want choice in education. We want to have things that can really make our country great again. What we're doing with the open border is a disaster. We are destroying our country. We're going to change that fast, and we're going to get your energy prices down.
Mr. President, thank you so much for this.
Our leaders are censoring speech. Our political parties are stifling debate. They're trying to prevent candidates from running against a president by either suing them, like Donald Trump. And I'm not a fan of Donald Trump. That's why I'm running against him. But I don't think we should be a banana republic and remove candidates using the courts. Oh, Americans. I don't want to beat Donald Trump that way, with half the country angry because they couldn't vote for a guy that they wanted. I don't want that resentment and that rancor to leave that. I don't want to win
by cheating, by getting rid of somebody.
What qualities are you looking for in your vice presidential pick?
Well, always the first quality has to be somebody that you think will be a good president, because if something should happen, you have to have somebody that's going to be a great president. A lot of people are talking about that gentleman right over there. And he's been so great. He's been such a great advocate. I have to say, this is in a very positive way, Tim Scott. He has been much better for me than he was for himself. I watched his campaign, and he doesn't like talking about himself, but boy, does he talk about Trump. And I said, I called him. I said, Tim, you're better for me than you were for yourself. But he's fantastic, and he's a fantastic person.
Someone who can step into the role.
Most importantly, you have to view that.
The audience has been asked who they think would be a good choice, and various names came up. One of them was, of course, Vivek Ramaswamy. Yeah. He's made a big splash. Ron DeSantis, who's making an appearance today in South Carolina, we just found out. Obviously, Tim Scott, Byron Donalds, and a big presence here for Tulsi Gabbard. Very interesting. And Kristi Noem as well, I should say. Right. Are they all on your short list? And when can we expect that you will announce your choice?
The one thing that always surprises me is that the VP choice has absolutely no impact. It's whoever the president is. It just seems. I remember when Sarah Palin was actually picked, and she did have a big up, and then they just went after her at a level that nobody's seen. The Republicans themselves went after what they did.
But you'll be a one-term president because you've already served, so you can only serve for one term, although they say you'll never leave office. I assume that you'll never leave. There'll never be another election
don't
again.
Do it. He'll never leave. He's never going. Oh, these people.
So for that reason, it is important who you pick.
So I think it's very important. But look, first is that, as we said, it has to do with whoever is, it's a very important position for that reason. You would like to get somebody that could help you from the voter standpoint. And honestly, all of those people are good. They're all good. They're all solid. And I always say, I want people with common sense, because there's so many things happening in this country that don't make sense. Who wants an open border? Who wants high interest rates? Who wants all electric vehicles? And they're fine, but you want to have choice. You want to go to combustion. You want to go to any hybrid. I think the hybrid are much better from that standpoint. But we were talking about faucets. We're talking about so much. It's all based on common sense. We want a strong military. We want choice in education. We want to have things that can really make our country great again. What we're doing with the open border is a disaster. We are destroying our country. We're going to change that fast, and we're going to get your energy prices down.
Mr. President, thank you so much for this.
RFK called me a couple weeks ago. He was coming to Minnesota, and he wanted to meet with me, and we were going to spend 2 days together so that I can get him off of this vaccine bullshit and start getting him to truly campaign on something that could win him the presidency, which ain't vaccines.
No.
And anyway, though, RFK and I were going to meet, and unfortunately he called me the day before and said he had a cancellation and a change of plans, so he didn't come to Minnesota yet. But let me ask you this. Did you guys ever read the book I wrote called Don't Start the Revolution Without Me?
No, I haven't read that one.
Well, I think you should. And the reason you should is this. It was the book I wrote right after getting out of office, and I'm traveling to my home off the grid in the Baja. And my wife and I both contributed to this book. And in the end of the book, I wrote all nonfiction until the last chapter. And this was a book I wrote back in 2004 after leaving office. The last chapter, I wrote fiction. You know what the last chapter was? Wait till you hear this. And this is 2004, nearly 20 years ago. The last chapter was, I team up with RFK Jr. and we run for president. Only I'm the president, he's the VP, and I get assassinated.
Interesting.
Wow.
And I wrote that book 20 years ago, and Dick Russell, my co-writer, I said, Dick, I want to do something strange with this book. He goes, what do you want to do? I said, the last chapter, without telling nobody, I want to write completely fiction. Well, that last chapter, if I look at it today, might not be fiction now.
If he called you,
only the difference would be RFK'd be on the top and I'd be the VP.
if RFK offered you the VP spot, would you take it?
I would give it serious consideration. Certainly, I won't tell you right now yes or no, because it would depend on my personal life.
Yeah,
and that is the commitment I told you about moments ago. You know, would I want to commit myself at age 72 for 1 year of hell? And then the worst part would be, and then possibly the worst part would be this:
winning.
Yeah.
And then I'd have to do it for 4 years.
Let me explain something to you, Mr. Ventura. I'm going to explain. Listen, this is very important. I approached you after you won your governorship, and you totally haven't reciprocated. I asked you for your support. You wouldn't give it back to me. I don't appreciate that. But I'm going to offer you an opportunity of a lifetime. Do not go with RFK. He's a total freaking loser. I am offering you the VP spot on my ticket, and believe me, you're going to want to take it. There you go.
No, I don't think Donnie will be offering me that spot. I did a piece.
He would definitely be shitting a brick if RFK made you his VP.
Yeah.
Well, I did a thing on Substack where I compared Trump to Manson.
That's an interesting comparison.
Look at it.
He has that kind of power.
They're very. What he did on January 6th is almost identical to what Manson did on August 8th, 1969, sending his followers out, waiting for him to come back. And here's the scary part: the exact same number of deaths the first night.
Really?
Yes, 5 people died.
That's interesting.
Very interesting.
Oh God, the comparisons are eerie. And I get it on Substack. Pull it up on Substack and read it. Kennedy's our greatest president of all time.
Because he stood up to the deep state and got dead?
No, it's simpler. John Kennedy is the greatest president of all time because they allowed him to serve the least.
Oh.
They killed him. They killed him before he had even served 1 term. Let me throw something to you. You're hinting at me to go with the libertarians, right? Right?
Yeah.
And I have all the respect in the world for the libertarians, but I also have butted heads with them. Because I remember the time I was governor and I was giving a speech on transportation, and the libertarians started to boo me.
Right.
So I stopped my speech and I looked at them and I said, you don't think the government should be involved in transportation? They all said no. And I looked at them and said, well, how'd you get here today?
Yeah.
I said, you guys, I love your libertarian and liberty attitude, but in a civilized society, and if the society's civilized, you have to have government. I said, how could you not with transportation?
Well, the biggest quality, the most important quality by far is how would they do as president? Because you really have to, that's the purpose. I mean, that's 95% of it, I would think. But so that would be number one. But politically, you'd want somebody that's compatible. You also want somebody you can get along with. You want to be able to get along with the VP. You work with them. And I think that's an important thing. But you really want to make sure that you pick somebody that, should it be necessary, and we hope it isn't, but they'll be a great president.
Now, in terms of President Trump, what I did at the beginning of this race is I said, I am going to try to focus not on these culture war issues and the vitriol that keep us all apart, but I'm going to focus on the values that we all share in common. And one of the things that I really try hard not to do is to not criticize personally either President Trump or President Biden. And we're going to the lawsuits or the litigation or whether that's fair or that's fair. I just stay away from that. And I try to talk about the issues that they care about. And I think that President Trump knows that I'm popular with his constituents, that I'm their second choice. And I don't think it's his advantage to attack me. I'm sure he will at some point. But he also knows that I'm not going after him personally, that I do attack his policies. I do criticize him for his failures, particularly during COVID. He should not have shut down 3.3 million businesses with no scientific citation, with no public hearings, with no environmental impact statements, none of the processes of democracy. But what I've tried to do is really focus, identify the values that we have in common. And what I found is there's a huge landscape that is so much bigger, the things that Americans agree on. Everybody wants to protect veterans. Nobody likes that, veterans' wives are now at soup kitchens. Everybody wants us to have the best education system in the country. Everybody wants to end the forever wars. Everybody wants to end the chronic disease epidemic. That now 60% of our kids now have chronic disease. When my uncle was president, it was 6%. Everybody wants to end this corrupt merger of state and corporate power that have turned our regulatory agencies into predators against the American public and sock puppets for the industries they're supposed to regulate. And there are so many of these issues. Everybody, look, if you want to talk about climate change, and that's the only environmental issue you're going to talk about, you're going to have everybody fighting each other. If you talk about clean water, clean rivers, clean air, about stopping the destruction of the Appalachian Mountains, about the fact that 100% of our freshwater fish now have dangerous levels of mercury in them, that acid rain is destroying the forest cover on the high peaks of the Appalachians from Georgia to northern Quebec. People don't like that. And there's no such thing as Republican children or Democratic children. Nobody wants that. Everybody wants our kids in houses. Everybody wants that. And what I'm trying to do is look at solutions and and find those issues. And I found out that those landscapes are so much larger than the little culture war issues that are being used to keep us apart.
Look, people are saying it 100 different ways, that they want somebody, they know what's wrong. They want somebody who can find ways to put it right.
Next question. There's a billboard outside of Grand Rapids, Michigan, paid for by the DNC that says you are powered by Trump and MAGA. What's your response?
The DNC is saying because one of my PACs, which I have nothing to do with, legally can have nothing to do with, accepted money from a traditionally Republican donor, that somehow this should disqualify me from people voting for me. We get money from Democrats, from Republicans and independents, and I'm proud that we're reaching across party lines, that we're trying to bridge the divide. President Biden says that he's trying to bridge the divide, but this is just the opposite. It's saying that there's a big difference that you're not really American if you're Republican. And I just don't believe that. I think we ought to have presidential candidates that are receiving support across political divides. We need to bridge the divide and heal this country.
You've chosen not to attack other candidates. They've attacked you, the Democrats in particular. Why do you think they're doing that?
Why do I think I think that they don't. They have a candidate who doesn't want to debate. And so they have to try to win the election by litigating against people, by trying to get people off the ballot, by denying me ballot access, by litigating against the other candidates to get them disqualified. So we won't have to do democracy in our country. And, I feel like we should be modeling democracy around the world. I don't want to win this election because I'm not a fan of President Trump's. I don't want to win this election by disqualifying him legally. I want the American people to decide who they want to have as president, and I want to beat him fair and square on a level playing field. And I think it's distressing that the Democrats don't want to do that. I'm not a fan of Donald Trump's, and that's why I'm running against him. But I think it's I've been outspoken about criticizing the Colorado decision and the Maine decisions because, we have a democracy in this country. We don't have a banana republic, at least we're not supposed to. People ought to be able to vote for who they want to vote for. I don't want to beat Donald Trump. I believe that I can beat him in an election and that I can beat him in a debate. And I want to do that fair and square. I don't want the playing fields slanted. I don't want to have an election where you get rid of a guy who, a large percentage of the American public want as their leader, and you're going to leave those people feeling angry and frustrated, and justifiably so. I've read the opinions. I don't see how they can stand judicial, Supreme Court scrutiny. I don't think you can get. Donald Trump has not been convicted of leading an insurrection. Maybe he did it, but he hasn't been charged with it. He hasn't been convicted of it. So you can't really, I don't think it's fair. I don't think there's due process in punishing him for a crime that he was never convicted of. It's not the American way of doing things. And I think as a strategy that it actually hurts the Democratic Party, because I think it discredits them and it makes President Trump kind of into this mythological figure, because people can see that this is not fair. So I want to beat President Trump, but I want to beat him fair and square in an election where everybody gets to vote for who they want to vote for.
Sir, what do you think about Tim Mellon's donation to the PAC? He's a donor of Trump's, and in 2015 he wrote in his book that black people were even more belligerent after the expansion of social programs in the 60s and 70s, and that the belligerent quote was a direct quote. And
I am not legally allowed to talk to my PAC about any of these issues, any of the super PACs. And there are several super PACs that support my campaign. It would be against the law for me to tell a PAC to who they could not accept money from. And my opinion is that it's a good thing to have both Republicans and Democrats and independents giving to my PAC. I don't know anything about those comments, and I can't verify them or validate them. But it would be illegal for me to pick up the phone and tell somebody you can't accept money from that PAC.
all right, thank you, everybody. Thank you.
I'm assuming, I don't know any more than you do, Tyreek. I read the polls, and it seems pretty clear to me that my most likely opponents are going to be President Biden and President Trump. My polling now shows me with the highest favorability rating among all of them. So my favorability rating in the Gallup poll that came out yesterday was at 52. President Trump's is at 42. President Biden's at 41. I beat both President Trump and President Biden among young people under 45 years of age, and I beat them among independents, which is now the biggest political party. And I still have 10 months to the election, so I feel very optimistic about where we're headed. President Trump's not going to bring this back. President Biden is not going to. President Trump, I believe, wants to, drain the swamp. I think he was sincere when he said that. But he appointed John Bolton to run the NSA. He's a swamp creature, like the template for swamp creatures. And, Scott Gottlieb, who was Pfizer's business partner to run FDA, and Pfizer and Gottlieb did Operation Warp Speed, an $88 billion gift to Pfizer, and then went back to collect his paycheck on the Pfizer board. So President Biden is not going to unravel it. President Trump is not going to do it. And, I think I'm the only candidate that knows how to do this, that understands how badly we need to do this in this country if we're going to return the middle class and if we're going to give our kids a chance.